Okay, so everyone, some of you may know who I am. John, president founder of Tesla Owners Silicon Valley. We also have Kelvin G, vice president. And as you know, we love to discuss all things Tesla. And obviously, one of those, the big things are solar panels. I recently got solar panels in the past year, and I had all of these type of questions that are going to be answered today by Spencer. And so um, typically with Tesla, we only really talk about the cars, but really solar panels are, and solar really is a huge part of it, and power walls as well. So, as we've kind of been looking to kind of also to just kind of build our plethora of resources really, at Tesla Owners of Silicon Valley, we've, come across Spencer. He owns a Tesla. Him and his wife own a Tesla, and actually not only are they pretty much from the area, they run a real estate business and a lending business. So it's a kind of a double factor there. And so we started this relationship about, I think we met a little bit over a year ago, year and a half ago, and we kind of just kept the conversation going, and then the opportunity opened up this year to tag team with them to really kind of again just bring someone to the table that not only is a Tesla owner, but is just really a good market fit, knows the market. If you kind of watch him on his weekly updates, he does give a weekly update on how the market is adjusting. And he's one of the few realtors that really has his hands wet with what's going on in the market, how, going back to work is impacting the market, whether it's the war, or, other things that are kind of as also along with as companies potentially even leave the Bay Area, how that's impacting the market. So one of those few realtors that really, again, has their real feet wet with what's going on. And so we thought it was a perfect fit. We actually, even one of our leaders is currently discussing to potentially, look to buy a home with him. So it's really important to just, again, build a well-rounded resource for all of our members, and obviously real estate was one of them. And so again, the question from there came up with, like, how do solar panels, like, are they really worth it? So Spencer and his team, they helped out about 63 clients last year, whether it was buying or selling. Again, he's got a weekly market update that hits his YouTube channel. So again, they're going to be a great resource to us. They've already sold or helped buy or sell about 20 homes, so they're going to knock that 63 client goal out of the park already. It's already only been 3 months, and so really excited to have him on board, not only as our realtor and lender, but also too as a member. Obviously, that's how he started. So I'm going to give you the reign, Spencer. So he's going to kick it off with the reason why we're all here is obviously to talk about solar panels. Are they really worth it? How do they impact your home value? And then he's just going to give a quick market update. And then from there, we're just going to open it up to our members to see, if you guys have any questions for him. So over to you, Spencer.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, John, for this opportunity. And I do want this to be engaging, right? Like, I'm not a solar vendor, so I have no skin in this game. But I do have clearly a lot of experience of what generally people will want from a resale perspective. But I also want to share just the general considerations, because I don't think that is brought up enough, right? Even though John may have had it, it sounds like other people may have had it. I'd love to get your thoughts as to, did you do these pros and cons before you bought it? What was the kind of the rationale of why you got it? Would you have done it if you knew these things that you should be considering? And does it actually help or hurt the value of your home? Solar doesn't always help it. And so I want to bring up an idea and showcase why that is. At the end, we'll go over the market update as well. I think that will be very beneficial for a lot of people that are interested of, like, what is actually happening with the Bay Area real estate market. We hear a lot of these news articles that are, very dramatic on both ends, right? As you also may know, there's either a lot of people leaving or home prices keep hitting records. They don't really match, because if everyone was really leaving, they wouldn't be doing this, right? So the truth always lies somewhere in between these kind of articles. And my goal, and why, thank you for bringing it up. You can easily just search for my name on YouTube, Spencer Sue. You'll find that I do weekly shows and weekly topics about what is happening from a headline perspective, but also what does the data actually look like. So I think you did a little bit of the intro on my end as well. So yes, to give you some quick background. So I'm born and raised in the Bay Area. I've lived here my entire life. I spent actually the first decade of my career in technology sales. So I was a software sales manager for over a decade, selling ultimately to clients all across the West Coast. I've actually been to Tesla's corporate headquarters many times, not just a factory, but also I met with many clients that are there in their Palo Alto location. And I haven't been to their Austin location, but many of my clients work at Tesla. And so I have a lot of experience and familiarity with how they're scaling and why they're doing what they're doing. But yeah, short story, I've been fortunate to have helped a lot of clients last year. And the fact is we are very lucky, but we are just getting started. And so all of these will have that perspective of coming from somebody that is a very big producer. Really, I'm in the top 1% in the country, how I think, and how you should all think if you decide to do it. And with any purchases or any investments, the thing that you always want to consider is what is the real payback of that? All the time, because they're so related to real estate, right? Whether it's solar, purchase or lease, whether they're an addition, whether they're an in-law unit, whether you should just use that money to just buy a new home instead. Like, do you even spend this money on expanding your home, or do you just straight up buy a new home and just sell your existing one? Right? All these questions are very common, and they're big purchase items, right? I mean, think about how much a solar installation costs today. We're not even talking about batteries, just the solar panels itself. I have a client that just bought a new construction home. Theirs is what, 13,000 for a new construction, 1,700 square feet, 2-story. So it's not a small amount, and that's probably as little as it gets. You can quite get a lot bigger as you do more and more things, have more and more panels, or you have battery packs, which is a different thing altogether. One thing I'll also bring up before we go over the pros and cons is a little bit about my team. So the way that we're set up, we've been expanding very rapidly. So we're continuing to bring on new realtors. You'll probably see a few of these individuals that comes around for the different events that we have monthly. We will be at each and every event. So if you guys happen to be at the next one, be sure to always drop by, say hello to either of us that happen to be there. My wife is a lender, so we decided to make it just a more seamless experience for our clients, where the real estate buying and selling and investing, along with the lending arm, is all within one point of contact. So what are the things to consider? These are the most important aspects of what you should even think about before you even consider to get solar panels, right? Number one, what is your monthly electric bill? And there's many different ways to calculate that, right? Think about PG&E. There are so many different tiers that they have. So you want to be realistic as, okay, well, your monthly spend is X. Is that going up? Is that also consistent? Like, do you have a lot more peak usage, or are there certain times of the month that it's just a lot higher, whether it's, I don't know, heating bills or whatever it may be? And so these are the things that are extremely important, because generally, for the most part, if you think about it, the more energy you use consistently, the more likely it is probably a better idea to get solar panels. But if it's very cyclical, then it may not be worth it. And quite frankly, any solar vendor will have this discussion with you. This is actually one of the very first things, and I love to get other people's feedback. Like I said, I'm not a solar vendor, but whenever I got quotes, this is the very first thing that people will ask, and it's a very fair one, because they want to qualify you or disqualify you up front if it's going to be even a remote fit, right? Because I have some clients, let's say their parents are on the PG&E, and then they're considered low income, so their electricity bill is like, let's say $100 a month. They're like, oh God, I probably will want to stay far away from this person. It'd be a waste of time, because $100 a month for your electricity bill is like nothing. And so but once they hear different numbers, they'll get a sense, okay, this is worth the further conversation. One other thing that people don't actually bring apart is this, right? Think about this. You're putting your panels on top of your roof, and if your roof is maybe old, or there may be potential leaks, or it's more prone to leaks, imagine trying to get those things repaired now that you have solar panels attached to it. So a lot of times it also matters, like, how old is your roof Does it have leaks? You want to always repair that and get that all out of the way up front, because trying to then repair it afterwards is a complete disaster and a complete nightmare. And so why a lot of times, like you have these solar installations, a lot of them just have brand new roofs to do it. But the question is, as you can imagine, different roof materials have different lengths of time that they can last. So are you actually replacing it too far in advance? So you're not even using the entire longevity of that roof? You gotta have to determine that, because every roof has its own shelf life. And so that's very important. Next, how long do you actually plan to live in the home? A lot of these upgrades, whether it's solar roofs, whether it's like even window installations, right? Like I get quoted all the time from window manufacturers saying, okay, your energy saving is going to be X. But if you do the math, you're like, okay, wait a second. If I ran my heater on all the time, the payback of all these windows to keep me more insulated, so I reduce my energy bill, maybe 10 years. So the question is, does that actually make financial sense? And that assumes you're running a heater all day to get to those numbers, right? So it's really important is, okay, if you plan to be moving in the next couple of years, or there's even a remote chance of doing that, it may not be worth it, because the next person that buys your house may not value the cost that you just added for it like you would, because your use cases are different. The other thing that you want to consider then is, do you buy it or do you lease it? What's the pro and con of each? The other thing for Bay Area, California is not as bad, but maybe it might be worse in some parts of the Bay Area, depending where you live, is how much sunlight you get. There'll be different people that do analysis for that. And the things that constantly change is what kind of promotions, or not, what kind of credits and tax breaks are there from the government level? That's kind of always in flux. Some years it's higher. There are always discussions about further projects, things like that. So let's talk about the pros, right? Solar panels. There are some tax credits that you can ultimately utilize. They are certainly a lot more affordable than previously before. Like the cost per kilowatt hour or per megawatt for these panels have reduced drastically, which has made it a lot more attractive. We don't get it too much. I think there was some period that we got more power outages, but not so much anymore here. But you have that ability to have power, especially if you pair that with a battery pack. Generally, that's the question fundamentally, is how long do you plan to be there? Generally, if you plan to be there for 8+ years, then it starts making more sense, where that investment is more worthwhile. Then that's where you really see the return typically of installing. And then, as I mentioned, it's a great option to pair with a battery pack. But that's a newer thing. Like, how many clients actually have a battery pack versus just pure solar is a very, very small amount right now. As that gets cheaper, but also just the awareness increases, we may see more and more of it. But I would say, quite frankly, for most people, that's a very, very small percent that would have that in place. So what are the cons of solar panels, right? So I know there's been, like, especially the last 2 years, due to inflation, due to supply chain constraints, the reality is the upfront cost can be prohibitive for some individuals. There are supply chain shortages as well. I've met many Tesla owners that have been on the queue already, waiting for theirs to be installed. And now they realize that that price got jacked up tremendously, and they may just cancel it altogether. So the timing of it is incredibly important. Is just because you have it planned for a certain date, is that what you're actually be paying down the road? Generally, especially if there's such a large gap, they will say, look, sorry, we can't do it at this number anymore. We will do it at this number. And then it becomes a complete different fiasco that happens. The next, it's quite frankly, for the most part, what I see from my own clients that are buying homes and just the general sentiment of the market. If you're planning to move soon, it's not that material of an impact. So just because you spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 is not the best return versus if you spend that you spent that money on flooring updates or a kitchen or a bathroom. Those would have way more significance, because that appeals to a much broader audience versus the cost of panels. And I brought up, it's typically not a good idea if you have an older roof. So that's why you got to consider, okay, well, what is the shelf life left of the roof? Do you want to replace that roof right now, which may still have actually a couple of years left? Typically, roof replacements, from what I've seen, are ranging from 15,000 plus. So that's a very material thing to add on top of just the ability to potentially add solar panels. So you can see there's all these other things that will add up that the solar vendor may not want to tell you. Like I said, I have no skin in this game. I just want you guys to all be aware to consider whether this is the right move or not. I'm not talking about any of the environmental impact. I'm not talking about, I'm not factoring that in. That's a quite frankly, a personal decision that people can make for themselves on that end. But from a pure analytical perspective, but also a pure just straight up pros and cons from what I see from my own clients and just in general of the public, these are the things that I hear all the time. In terms of options to buy or lease, there are options. Now, if you think about it, when you purchase the panels though, the purchasing of the panels, the benefit of that is if you plan to live in a long time over an extended period of time, even though the absorption of the panels get worse and worse over time, generally there is a break-off point, which is usually about 8 to 9 years, is typically that cutoff point, assuming even an inflation of energy prices. And also assumes continuous use. Now, if you leased it, that's a different matter. Leasing it then is the arbitrage. Okay, well, how often are you using it? Are you using energy? And is the cost lower than what you would get using from your utility bill? The downside of that is that you will be paying a monthly amount regardless. And so, and if you think about it, a lease is a liability. So the downside of that is at least it's kind of neutral. Well, it's a little bit more of a positive, quite frankly, if there are solar panels, if it was owned. But if it was leased and now you're selling it, the next person may not value that as much. They may think of that as just an extra expense that they just would not value, or it's something that they have to maintain. So I've seen that complaint a lot. It's almost similar to the way that I almost think about it now is thinking about a pool. So a pool is kind of bipolar now too. A cost of adding a pool is very expensive, and the cost of burying a pool is also very expensive. But even if you don't bury it and you just want to maintain it, it's going to cost you a couple $100s a month, even if you just don't use it, right? And that's for many people a liability. And so the question is, what is it in the eyes of the next person, especially if they're not familiar with it or they just never even wanted it? So some things just to consider. As I mentioned, there's actually a couple of calculators. So what I would suggest for you all to do, and I'm sure any solar vendor will have it, but I do want you all to run this math if you're even thinking about doing this, is do you plan to be in that same house for 8 years? If you are, then it is likely worth it. If you're not, you may want to consider whether you want to do it or not. And then you feel free to use these calculators. I'll share these slides afterwards so people can have it. We can have it in a link anyways. But there are many calculators out there that help you decide what's the return on investment when you lease versus buy, what is the payoff period, how many panels you may need. There's all sorts of these calculators that are readily available, so you can always play with them and decide, does it make sense for you? So that's high level what I want to go over about just the general thoughts of the considerations of solar. Also, the general feedback from my own clients. As a kind of conclusion to this, generally, if you own panels, I'll separate it. If you own panels, for the most parts, it's a slight positive. I don't think actually you would get that full cost back. Now, in the Bay Area, it's kind of a very small percent of the value of a home. So there are many other major factors that are much bigger.
Dr. Prager, how are you?
Thank you, doctor. How are you?
I'm good. Okay. So tell me what brings you here to the allergist.
Hey, John, can you get one of you guys mute, Stephen?
Yeah, who's that?
Is that Stephen?
When did that start?
Since our childhood.
Okay.
Actually,
Sorry, guys. Let's see, where's
that-
sorry about that.
Okay, cool. So as I was saying, yeah, so the question is ultimately from a lease versus purchase perspective. From what I've seen from a market perspective, it's not a much big, like there's much better returns on your investments than adding a solar panel right now. It's way better to just renovate your kitchen, renovate a bathroom, things like that have returned a lot better. So this is more of that personal decision on your internal use, whether it makes sense long-term from that perspective. That's what I see on the purchase side at the moment, and things may change. But at the moment, it's that way. From a lease perspective, it typically is a negative. Not many people are fond of that at all. It is usually a net negative. So be mindful of that when you are thinking about trying to sell, because you can't even get rid of it. There's a big cost to get rid of it because there's some agreement that you have to sign. And I think most of those agreements, they're like 10-year plus. So you're generally pretty locked in from all the lease agreements that I have reviewed. But those are my general thoughts from what I see on the whether it's worth it to do or not. So at the end of the day, it's time horizon. Like I said, there's other factors involved, but those are the things I would highlight related to this decision. Anyone have any questions or thoughts? Otherwise, I'll go over the market just to give you some sense of what's been going on.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention this year is I think the last year where you can get 26% back from the feds, specifically on your solar. So 26 cents for every dollar that you spend. And then I think next year it drops to 22. But yeah, I think I just wanted to put that out there. And also too, it does typically, I think Spencer had mentioned that, just dealing with all the supply chain issues, like if you want to get an order in, I mean, really, any solar company is fine. Obviously, we're Tesla owners group, so obviously Tesla would be the preferred. But Tesla, you would want to get that order in sooner than later. Again, it's kind of like waiting for a Model Y right now. But I just wanted to mention the federal tax incentive.
Yeah, great point. So we got a question from Jean-Marc. Is there a rule of thumb to get a rough sense of upfront cost, e.g., example upfront cost equal X per square foot? There is. I don't want to give specific numbers, but I would say typically, even on a smaller size, what I've seen is roughly 10 to 15K plus, but it's really, and that's likely a 1,600-ish square foot home. But it really depends, right? There's different panels that you can choose. Your usage is dependent too, right? Because there's no reason to have overkill of too many panels when you don't even need all that power. So the idea is they would come to your house and they will do that analysis and they'll give you the breakdown. But even the small ones I've seen is like 10 grand plus. Oh, that's great, Eric. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of competition. I mean, I don't think Tesla's the biggest player. I think it's probably Sunrun. And so, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. There's going to keep, I mean, that's a benefit though, on one end, right? It's it's such a competitive market and there's a few big players and it's just almost a race to the bottom. So it's good for consumers. So you hope that it keeps happening, but at the same time, if they're having issues with supply constraints, then the overall market prices are higher. So that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I think I got my solar back in August. I was in that time frame where actually I was able to get the financing. It was literally 1% over 10 years, which is insane because it had just dropped from, I think it was like 6-7%. I think right now they're doing 10 years at 3% for the financing. But it's awesome to hear, Eric, that it sounds like they're price matching too. So, but yeah, and then I think even Kelvin's saying his system is 8 kilowatts, 1 power wall. I have 8 kilowatts, 2 power walls. I'm on one of the other benefits. So I live in Los Gatos, and they are notoriously shutting down our power all the time, PG&E specifically. And I'm literally like across the street from the San Jose grid. So my street is like half Christmas lights during half the time when they shut off the power. And then my house is like all black. So we did it specifically, not only for, the environmental reasons, but also too, just to kind of not have to rely on PG&E. So it really also just depends on where you are in the Bay Area. If PG&E is just like causing rolling blackouts, they were doing 7 to 10 days a year where they were just shutting off our power. So now I have 2 days worth of backup, which is huge.
That's a great point, right? So a lot of the places in the hills, because of the wildfire, I mean, I'm sure that's part of now maybe some agreed upon procedure to try to minimize those situations, especially as weather patterns are more extreme. And so if you're in the hills and you don't want that disruptive situation, then those become more and more. And the question though for that is, how much is that worth to that individual? And that's a personal decision then.
And you could actually even weigh that. How much, like for example, I got kids as well. So when I would go out for power for 2 days, I would literally have to throw away all my food. So it's like, you're talking anywhere from like $200 to $400, and they're doing it that multiple times a year. So you can even add that into your electricity costs. So it really depends.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing, right? Some in your area will be like that. Some areas that doesn't happen. Like the rolling blackouts are not related to that. And so that's why everybody's situation is a little bit different. So the key is just adding it all together. What is it worth to that individual? Those are all material. If there's no other questions, the people that want to stay around can listen into a quick market update. I'm going to go over the data itself because there's a lot of noise out there. Let's just say that, and some of it is true. I'm not saying it's not. Others are not that can be corrected. And so if we're good here, let's go over the market data report itself. And I'm going to do some screen share. I'm going to mainly cover, let's just put Santa Clara County for this instance. So what are the big news that has been going on? The big news is ultimately most companies, especially the big tech companies, are requiring people to head back into work. Most of these announcements have come in the last week. You can see what Google is doing. You can see what Apple is doing. You can see what Meta is doing. You can see what Microsoft is doing. They're all doing the same thing. They have built a tremendous amount of corporate real estate space in the last couple of years, and they are now requiring people to head back into the work. Now, I don't think this is not surprising, and I know it for myself because I am very fortunate to have clients that work in those companies, and you bet a lot of these internal discussions were happening way before the public is now aware. Otherwise, why would there be such a strong buyer side in the beginning of the year? I mean, there's a couple of reasons, but that's also one big part of it. The other reason, and so that's the thing. If people are truly now forced to be back into the office, and they will be starting in April, what we have not experienced in a long time is traffic, and people have forgotten that. And so that's going to be very material as people make the decisions as to what to do. Number one, we'll have way more people back. Number two, traffic becomes a factor. And so even though you may be working from home 2 days a week, you're still going to be sitting in that traffic those 3 days a week. And it's up to the individual to make that decision. I have some clients that move to Tri-Valley for that reason. I have other clients that move around big tech for that exact reason. So that's kind of what the theme. And the other theme is, you may have all seen, interest rates have picked up very quickly. All the forecasts were never this amount at this stage of the year. Most were assuming that maybe we hit 4% at the end of this year. But what happened was actually because of inflation being at 7.5%, the Fed wanted to try to get ahead of it and maybe overreacted. And so they had announced a lot of rate jumps that are expected throughout the year. I think there was 5 expected. And so what did the markets do? The markets reacted as they would. And at the moment, you're looking at, I think, conforming amounts about 4%. That's about maybe a 0.75% increase within the last 1 or 2 months. So it's been a very big jump. And so what does that do? There's 2 ways to think of it, right? On one end, you can think of it of maybe the market cools down because the rates are higher, maybe. And the other option is, okay, well, the markets are going up. I might as well lock in my rate now because they're potentially expected to go up further. And so you have people that are making the move that way. Time will tell who is right, but the reality is that's clearly a catalyst for that. Now, the last thing I want to bring up is, people keep complaining about inventory is low. The reality is inventory is low, but inventory is low because homes do not stay on the market long. Most homes that you will evidently see sell within 1 week. Now, however, there's a distinguished thing for people to understand. There are more transactions that are happening right now than last year. And last year was more transactions than pre-COVID. So people have this sense that they think that people are just not selling for whatever reason. There are more transactions happening than pre-COVID right now. And so what does that mean? It means there's plenty of movement, which means a lot of people have been moving out, but clearly a lot of people have been settling down and moving in to buy those homes. And what does that mean? Let's take a look at prices. Let's take a look at what has been going on. This is Santa Clara County. So I'll share you Santa Clara County, single family homes, residential, the median sales price. You can see the data itself. This is an incredible growth. And a lot of it is just this last 2 months. I mean, this is a very stellar growth, right? Look at January at the median sales price of Santa Clara County is at 1.68 million. Right now in March is 1.925. This is a, was that 250,000? So that's equivalent of 15% in 2 months. And this number will be higher because remember, this data is all what has transacted in the previous month, if you think about it, right? Because the ones that closed in March were offers that were accepted in February. And this is, it may not be at the same growth level, but this is very clear evidence of a lot of people moving in the Bay Area or deciding to settle down. And I think a lot of it has to do with all those factors, right? The situation with Ukraine, I'm just going to talk about from a real estate perspective, kind of helped it a little bit. And why did that happen? It didn't impact much companies, but interest rates actually, if you look at it, have actually slowed down their growth. They actually, some had declined, interest rate had declined, which actually is a good thing sometimes for home buyers. It's a nice pause. So that didn't impact any confidence at all. It certainly had done a sizable impact, but I don't know if Ukraine did that. There's a lot of things prior, especially with expecting higher interest rates that impacted more than Ukraine. So a lot of tech companies and a lot of tech stocks have taken a tumble, but the big tech companies have still did fine generally, especially like companies like Google and Apple. They've done just fine. Microsoft, these companies have continued to smash revenue and profits. And so this is what we see. You know, it is what it is. There's only so many homes in the Bay Area, especially single family homes. My guess is you can all count in one hand how many single family home communities have been built in Santa Clara County in the last decade. The reality is there's no room and there's no desire to be able to build that kind of property. Hence why you see a lot of activity and some of the strongest and quite frankly, the biggest increases that we have seen so far. And so that's been what's going on, right? So what did I tell my buyers and sellers just as a conclusion of how to understand and decipher this? It doesn't mean you should give up as a home buyer because you may all see that rent prices are continuing to go up quite a bit as well. There's a lot of new construction, luxury apartments. 2 bedrooms are being rented for $5,500 a month, and they're selling just fine. So there's no shortage of expensive rentals. And so what I tell everyone, if you're a buyer and sit on the buy side, I tell them all, look, this is the reality of the market. Wherever you may be looking may not be doable. And it's just the truth. But your budget will have different bands in different neighborhoods and areas across the Bay Area. It's now the understanding, the realization to adjust your bands accordingly to have a realistic shot. Maybe last year you can afford Sunnyvale. Now you have to look in Santa Clara, or now you look in San Jose. As you move east and you move south, it's cheap, the cheaper it is. And so the people that can adapt to that have been successful still and have done very well. The people that don't, I've personally seen they just give up and they pay rent again and to pay even more rent. So that's kind of on the buy side. On the sell side, as you can see, there is no better time in history to be selling a place. So for those that are thinking about moving, like it's a crazy good time. You get whatever, almost a record price, certainly a record price. You get whatever terms you want. Like if you want 2 months of free rent back, you get 2 months of free rent back, right? You're going to get the best options that you can. You get the most flexibility that you can. And so it just depends on people's time horizon. That's what it boils down to, especially as so many people return back, but some people may decide to have the flexibility and move somewhere else. And so that's high level what's been going on with the market. I can answer any other questions. Otherwise, we can get this concluded.
Yeah, at least I wasn't born here, but pretty much raised here. Since I was like 1. What I've noticed, especially probably in the past 10 years, is like the people that continue to just keep waiting, obviously, again, it depends on what you can afford too, but they keep just missing out, right? The longer you wait, the market just continues to go up long term. So even more specifically in the past like 5 years.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's not about timing it either. Like, make no mistake, it's not month over month. It just goes up straight up. It's overall over a year over year. Even then, it's not necessarily guaranteed, but over an extended period, you should see, historically, you've seen those increases, right? The history of single family homes for the last 4 decades is about 8% increase a year. So it's a little bit worse than S&P, but then again, you're living in this home, there's tax benefits, there's all these other notions of it that are applicable. And also you're using leverage with a loan. And so those are all the things to be considered, right? So it's not about trying to time a market, because if you were that, I tell the clients that are trying to time a market, if you were that good, you should have just bought last year, or you should have bought 2 years ago. Did you have the mindset to then buy, like when things were going south? Because the market is very different then. Like, can you psychologically do that? And most people cannot stomach it, and that means you can't time it. And so rather than trying to time it, it's like, okay, understand what can you reasonably afford, what kind of home do you want, these are the areas that you will look. It's very simple, right? The Bay Area, fortunately, is very easy. The more east and south you go, the cheaper it is. And so if you want a bigger home, then at a specific price, and you stay there. And it's just about understanding where are those circles, where are those spots, and then that's how people get extreme. That's how people are successful.